Hi, and so getting ready for the Age of Sigmar Grand Tournament, or at least the heats, for this May, I was, over the last couple of weeks, considering different types of army I'd like to take. So I've already done videos on the three allegiances I'd thought about: Legions of Asgore, Maggot King of Nurgle, and Legions of Nagash. And I've done videos on what I'm thinking in terms of a 2,000 point list for each of those. So if you haven't seen those videos, they're in the same playlist as this one. What I'm going to do in this one is consider the battle plan. So as I've been playing various games of Age of Sigmar, as I've been getting back into it over the last year, well, I say back into it, we're never into Age of Sigmar, it's Fantasy Battle, but you know, Warhammer. And what's really crucial is where I tend to make mistakes and when I'm likely there to lose a game. It's by losing sight of what is actually needed to get the major victory. So the way Warhammer Fantasy Battle tournaments used to work, it was a very much smash and grab. It wasn't enough to win. You wanted to win by as much as possible, preferably a massacre, and that basically meant destroying as much of your opponent's army as possible in terms of how many points each unit was worth, and losing as little yourself. Very, very different in Age of Sigmar. You can be beaten hollow in terms of the army clashes, but still win the game. Give you an example of a game I played yesterday, inaugural match with the Skaven, and yes, there'll be a battle report coming, where I lost. But actually, towards the end, I almost could have won it. Almost. Just because of objectives. I was absolutely being thrashed by the other army in terms of the combat. I was losing scores of it, but there was almost an opening for me, and that's what you've got to keep your eyes on the prize. And another, I've lost a couple of games recently. Another one was actually where I tried to take too many objectives instead of just focusing on the number I needed to win. Stretched myself too thin. So what I've been looking at in terms of the rules pack, first of all, I was expecting you've got 5 games, and each game is going to be a different battle plan. You don't randomly roll with your opponent like you would a normal game. They're determined for you, but not predetermined, so you don't know which battle plan it's going to be for each one until they announce it. And so I thought, okay, so over the course of the weekend, I'm going to be playing 5 out of the 6. But no, it includes the ones in the General's Handbook as well. So there's actually 18 battle plans. It'll be 5 out of those 18. Oh, there's a few to learn there. However, when I was reading through them, and I've never really looked at the General's Handbook ones because we just, in the club, roll on the ones in the core rulebook, it actually comes down to 3 types of battle plan. One is the type of battle plan where there are multiple objectives and you just get points according to having control of them at the end of each of your turns, usually starting from turn 2. There's another type of battle plan where you've only got like 2 objectives. So evidently you need to hold your own, but also take your opponents fairly quickly as well. And then the third one is one where only heroes can, for example, 3 places of power where only heroes can capture them. So you need heroes to be able to get themselves on those markers, get themselves first, and stay there for the whole battle. So what we're going to look at is how I think the 3 armies would do with those 3 types of battle plans, because the other battle plans, as far as I can tell, are just variations on these 3. So let us have a look. First of all, Legions of Asgore. These are the Chaos Dwarves. Just a quick reminder of what I have in here. So I have a couple of combat-orientated units out to the flanks. Obviously, I don't necessarily stick to this as a rigid way I deploy them, but just, for general purposes. Couple of units with decent shooting. Some war machines with very decent shooting. 2 beefy characters and 1 character who's going to be there for the utility of those war machines. So if we have a look at the first one, Border War. So this is a classic one. So you've got 1 objective in your deployment zone, 1 in your opponent's, and 2 along the border. And they're worth points according to how difficult they'd be to capture. So again, I think this starts from turn 2. But if at the end of your turn, and you're totting up your victory points, if you control your own, and the way you control these objectives, the standard rules are how many models have you got within 6 inches of it compared to your opponent. It's just number of models, that's it. So your own should be relatively easy to capture, so you get 1 point for that. The ones on the board are a bit more difficult. You get 2 points for each of those. And if you can capture your opponents, you get 4 points. But there is no need to go all out risking catastrophe by trying to capture your opponent's one, because at the end of the day, if you can advance to the point where you can capture the 2 border ones, then in a situation like that, you're obviously going to need to have something to hang back to capture your own as well. You're getting 5 points a turn. Your opponent is getting a maximum of 4 points. As long as you can get them quickly and you can hold them, then you will win. So having a little look at how this could be achieved with these. This is more of a stand back and shoot army. So actually advancing, not as straightforward. But if you were to try and get the fire glaives, the shooting unit, the artillery, the gunner unit, to get onto those objectives, supported, use your melee units to push the rest back. Doesn't matter if they get into a protracted fight. Doesn't matter if they ultimately die, as long as they don't do it straight away. The aim is to keep your opponent off those objectives, and after a few turns you should be in good shape. Now, obviously though, the war machines can just stay capturing their own. They should be able to defend themselves very admirably from that as well. The problem here, of course, is I make it look easy like that. They're not a fast army. The Bull Centaurs, decent speed, and the characters can move. The Kadai Fireborn are going to be able to move. So they really are going to have to push the opponents off it, get past it. Rather than be the units to capture it, I think I need them to push past it, hold up the opponent so the fire glaives can actually get onto them, and try and go from there and just, win the war of attrition. I wouldn't be as confident on this particular battle plan with this army, but at the same time, with the war machines blowing the hell out of everything, I think there's a decent chance of it. The next one would be the take and hold. Now, in a case like this, of course, as a very stand-back army, I will have a much easier chance protecting my own one, because my opponent, if it's a very attacking one, is going to have to commit troops, but they daren't leave their own unprotected, because I do have fast units that could sweep round and nick it. So I'd probably be thinking of letting them come on to me initially, and then, if I can start to outnumber them, overpower them a little bit, then push forwards there. But I think, to begin with, sort of hang back, then try and push forwards, preferably along 2 fronts, and even moving the war machines up for better range. Just on 2 fronts, just to try and get my opponent to split themselves up, really. That would be the plan, But I'd be quite confident of this one, because I say, if you can afford to just stand back and shoot, you keep your army together. You keep it together. Now, the 3 places of power, a little trickier. So what you have to do with this objective is you can, and I think it's shorter ranges. I think it might only be 3 inches, but you can only capture it with a hero. So the first hero to get in range of that objective, whatever that range is, captures it. And the only way to take it, it's no good having 2 of your heroes against their one. That doesn't matter. So whoever got there first captures it until you can kill them. And then, it'll sort of depend then who captures that. But obviously no one's going to have loads of characters. Now, in a case like this, super important I don't try and capture all 3. Realistic with this army, I won't fall into that trap, because that would mean moving my Demon Smith onto one of them. Well, he's just a little utility character. I'm not doing that. So in reality, what I'd want to do is to move Sharto onto one, Drazoth onto the other, supported by all the units. The war machine's just hanging back, really. The opponent's going to have to come onto them, so I don't really need to move the war machines up, really. If I could edge them up a little bit, potentially, but I don't need to. Just make sure that I capture 2 of them, but then put pressure on the 3rd. Okay? So that if I can stop them capturing theirs in the same time as I capture my 2, then they're already going to be behind for later on as well. Obviously, again, this suffers from the same problem as the border war, though. These units are not terribly fast in terms of the support coming, but the heroes are. The heroes can move at a decent speed. Now, if I got the first turn, then we'd be okay. In this particular case, though, I think I'd be unlikely to with this army, because if you have a look at it, let's just count up again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 11 placements deployment. There's no battalions in this. So there is actually a decent chance my opponent would have to go first, in which case it may well just have to be weaken 2 positions and then run in and capture them. You can probably get away with it for a couple of turns. Remember, if your opponent has them for a couple of turns, but you have them for the rest of the battle, then you'll still win, Right, so that's Legion of Asgore anyway. Looking at it, anything that's going to, like a take and hold one or gift from the heavens, where there's 2 objectives, one in your deployment zone, one in your opponent's, or if you've got objectives very close to your own deployment, I think this army is going to be ideal because, it's going to be very comfortable standing back. It's going to have more firepower than almost any other army. So I'd be happy about that. Other ones where you've got to be a bit more proactive and push forwards, less so, a bit slower in terms of getting the support up at least. And the last thing you want to do is race ahead with your quick ones and then find that they do get defeated very quickly. They can't hang on for the support. So pros and cons with this one. The next one's the Legion of Nagash, where not the one I'm with Nagash, although I don't rule that out yet. This one would be Prince Vordrai and Manfred, as well as a Necromancer for heroes. 2 big blocks of Skeleton Warriors and a minimum size unit of Direwolves, Black Knights and Blood Knights. So for the Border War, what we'd be looking at here is, for some reason I duplicated that. So keeping hold of your own one, just very straightforward with the Direwolves, just hold them back there. My main plan with Direwolves anyway would just be to go ahead of the other cavalry and waste itself on whatever wanted to get in the way first. But they can just hang back and hold on to that. Get the Skeleton Warriors onto the 2 other ones. Now the plan for this one, potentially, is you could use the graveyards. If you, might be a little bit risky, it depends on the terrain and everything else, but depend on the lay of the land. If you put the Skeleton Warriors in reserve, then it means you can have them appear at the end of your first turn, at the end of your movement phase in your first turn, near those graveyards. And if you can't put the graveyards on top of objectives, but you can put them close enough that you could put the Skeleton Warriors on top of the objectives when you brought them in as reserve, and then move the faster units forwards like that. That would be the ideal. Of course, that again would rely upon me getting the first turn. And what have we got there? 8 units. Touch and go, maybe, maybe not. For 2,000 points. I think, to be honest with you, I think 8 units is probably about par for a 2,000 point army. So, possible. If not, then I'm just going to have to fight my way onto it. The Skeleton Warriors are quite useful because they can, there's going to be 40 of them, so it's going to take a bit of time to munch through them anyway. And when they're in range of the heroes, each of those heroes is capable of raising a few back up as well. And then the idea, of course, is the cavalry would push forward to try and keep my opponents off it. Again, I mustn't be thinking to myself, I want the cavalry to live, pick on the weaker units as such. It's really a case of, even the Blood Knights act as a block, act as an absolute barrier. Even the characters, if necessary, get those skeletons on top of the objective and then push against my opponent who's trying to, obviously, to protect the skeletons. The skeletons would effectively be the most important units. Yes, the Direwolves are back there, but at the end of the day, they're not going to be able to go all around there and take on the Direwolves, because if they did, well, do you know what? This is all fairly close quarters. Everything that is actually... Everything in the middle there that you see, basically Manfred, Prince Vordrai, Blood Knights, Black Knights, they're all just there if necessary to sacrifice themselves, not do anything reckless, but keep everything off it. Well, they're all fast enough to get back and support the Direwolves if necessary as well. So for Border War, I actually think this will be quite good. The skeletons in reserve. Obviously, that decision will be based upon the notion of can I get the first turn? And you're going to know that in advance because you're going to look at the situation. If I've got 8 units, if my opponent's got 9, I know I can do that. And I will do that. If my opponent has 8, then it'll depend on the die roll. But again, you make your decision as you're deploying. So I'm going to know in advance whether that's what I want to do or not. So there you go. Now, the take and hold. So this is going to be a straightforward, need to gradually weaken my opponent, just need to win. So with this army, I wouldn't be thinking of capturing that objective. Obviously, what you want to do is you want to do that. You don't just want to sort of play for a draw on the objectives and then just win it on number of units destroyed, because that's a minor victory, not worth as many points for the tournament as a major victory. And I want to get all the major victories, of course, if possible. Obviously, I'm not going to get all major victories. It'd be nice to get as many as possible. But at the same time, with something like this, it is quite tricky. I'm going to have a particular line of attack, and you know, same thing before in terms of protecting mine. Direwolves there, push the skeleton warriors forwards, and just try and win a war of attrition, and in the hope that I can. Because with this one, it's not even about victory points. There's no victory points attached to it as such. You know, if from the third turn on you've captured both objectives, you win the game. And that's what it's all about, slowly trying to push my opponent off those objectives. And again, the Blood Knights, the Black Knights, Prince Vordrai, even Manfred, they're all there to just destroy things, even if it means they themselves die. Just take out whatever's going to stop those skeleton warriors getting onto that opponent's objective. Move together, don't rush ahead with the faster units, just move together. Keep the direwolves back there, obviously. Make sure that I can get back to support them if anyone tries to go around the outside, which they might, because on this particular one, I would have one line of attack. I don't think I would split my army up and try and attack in two directions either. The 3 places of power. Now, with this one, I'm actually going to be quite confident, I'm going to have to say. So, straight away, it would still be skeleton warriors on it, even though they don't capture it, just to get it forwards and get it and stop my opponent getting there. Again, if I'm able to have the first turn and I can set up graveyards so that I can have them pushed even further forwards, all to the better. And then just have Prince Vordrai and Manfred get there. They can get there quickly as well. They can easily get to those objectives in the first turn. And then it's a case of try and shift me. But again, the opponent will possibly, well, hopefully, probably, try and at least get something so that the game doesn't get away from them. Because I will have no characters going for the third objective, so hopefully they'll take some of their army over for that, and I can put pressure on it. Don't allow them to just put a rubbish cheap character, because if I just reinforce my 2 with everything I've got, they'll just put something useless, like a wizard or something on it, and they're capturing it for free basically. No, put pressure on it, so they again have to split their army. Because you know what, the Skeleton Warriors and Manfred and Prince Vordrai, I think, are going to be pretty decent. The Necromancer back there for the Van Helsdance Macabre. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, wow, you know, yeah, I'd look forward to this. I'd fancy my chances with this, depending on how many units my opponent has. But I would suggest there are some lists that I've seen that have fewer than 8 units. 8 units seems to be about what you'd expect, right average. So it can depend on that a little bit. And then the final army is, of course, the Nurgle list. So again, just to quickly run through what I've got here. 4 behemoths. You know, this is all about me smash. So, Great Unclean One as the general, with the Doomsday Bell to allow for fast movement. Because again, with objectives, fast movement is where it needs to be at, not just slowly ambling forwards. And they can turn what should be a slow army, there's no cavalry here, into a very fast army. You know, especially, and I know for tournament lists, some people with the Great Unclean One, or their general in general, will take the command trait that allows you to, once per battle, just set the cycle of corruption where you want. Now, with games I've played so far, I've tended to be a bit glib about it and have attempted to cast Foul Regenesis, a spell that allows me to do just that. Because that, of course, in the first turn would give you that +2 inches of movement, which could be absolutely crucial. Because then, you know, in range of the Great Unclean One, and with that, everything's got +5 movement. All of a sudden, that's pretty rapid. Whereas if I take that command trait, I'm missing out on another one that could be useful, but I guarantee that I can give them all that 2 inches of movement on the first turn. And if you look at this, we've got 7 units here. That has got to have a decent chance of being able to have the first turn if I so choose. So let's go through the list here. So Border War. So again, it's all about capturing the 2 on the border, whilst having something that is also racking up the points on yours as well, just to keep ahead. Remember, you're only really going to be keeping ahead 5-4 by doing this, so you do need to make sure you can keep them held. The plan for this, Plague Bearers on one, get them shifted across. Chaos Warriors on the other. Hang the Putrid Blight Kings behind, not because of any other reason than the fact then they're not as defensible as the others. The Chaos Warriors, I mean, I'd rather lose the Chaos Warriors than the Putrid Blight Kings. The Putrid Blight Kings can, depend on how the battle's going, always come forwards a bit as well and be a last line of defence. And then what I would likely do is have the Chimera go down, one flank to harry something, to draw forces away, because that can cause a real nuisance, and have the big 3 Nurgle heroes together to support each other, and they can crash into the enemy army. They can cause so much damage. Like I was saying, I had a battle week before last, I think, where it was a complete disaster. It was only a 1,000 point game. I had a Great Unclean One in it though. Complete disaster. My army, I stretched it too thin, let it get wiped out. But the Great Unclean One, it destroyed so much of my opponent's army single-handedly. And if it had carried on, if it wasn't anything to do with, limited number of turns or anything, he would have destroyed the rest. He destroyed the worst of the army. There was only the crap units left to get. And that's one Great Unclean One, basically wiping out 1,000 points of a Tzeentch army. So a Great Unclean One, a Glottkin, and Rotigus. Yes, there's going to be monsters that could also give them possible, but they're so tough. I mean, the Great Unclean One and Rotigus, who's a named Great Unclean One, have 16 wounds. You've got the Disgustingly Resilient and start of each hero phase heal D3 wounds as well. The Glottkin's got 18 wounds and all that as well. So, this I would, if I can get there quickly, and remember, that there is a decent chance of being able to get those units onto those objectives. Not past those units on the first turn, that's unlikely, but getting them to it, and then it's just a case of having those heroes. They push forward. They basically act as a blockade against much of the rest of the army, and we'll just see how it goes from there. So, in terms of the take and hold, so this is just going to be, again, much like with the Legion of Nagash, I am going to have to push forward, and that's always a bit of a worry because you're pushing forward with not your whole army because you need to have something hang back. Now, in this particular case, it'd be the Chaos Warriors. Largely in this particular case, because let's say it's Gift from the Heavens as well, because, in Take and Hold, the actual battle plan Take and Hold, where the objectives are. Gift from the Heavens, you don't, and you don't find out until turn 2. So I'd probably have them actually out in a line so they could move just as a snake to whichever side it landed if it didn't land in the middle, with everything else pushing forwards. And again, although it looks a bit spread out, trying to attack one line, really keeping it all together so that it can support wherever it's going to find the best purchase. The Plague Bearers very much ahead there because they're just going to be a meat shield. There's 30 of them. They've got Disgustingly Resilient, on a battle. And, the Glottkin's got a spell. If he gets it off, he can give them all 2 wounds as well. So you've got a 60 wound unit if I can get that off. And even if not, I mean, on your battle shock tests, even if it doesn't matter, you don't lose that many. Roll anyway, because if you get a 1, you're going to get to add D6 to them. So, they're going to be able to stand for quite a while against everything. And then behind them, you've got your armies that are going to go in and smash at things that are not taking on the Plague Bearers and the Chimera as well down the side. I mean, that could be a frightening prospect for the opponent. But again, you don't have to rush ahead with everything. Keep everything together and just slowly beat back your opponent until you can actually capture it. And then again, you win instantly if you capture it from turn 3 onwards. And it would take at least till turn 3 before you could actually manage that. So then on to the final one, the 3 places of power. This is the most dangerous one for this sort of army because you could almost imagine, well, should I try and capture all 3? No, I need to be disciplined on this. Don't attempt to capture all 3. I don't need all 3. And the bottom line is, if I can capture 2 of them, and I then get beaten off one of them, if it's possible to beat me off one of them, then obviously I would never have been able to stand up to trying to capture 3. I'd have spread it out too thin and done exactly what I did the week before last. So the plan with this one is, although Rotigus is sort of going for that one, you can see on there, in reality he'd be prioritising supporting the centre. But again, I still want to put pressure on that third one, because if I can capture 2 really quickly, and remember, you know, with run rolls I can shift them forward. Remember, I can have a minimum of +5 onto movement, and then a run roll will be whatever it is. Get them forward really quickly, and get the Great Unclean One, the Glottkin, onto those. So at that point, they've now captured them. Getting more heroes there isn't going to save them. They've got to kill them. That's easier said than done. Put the other units in harm's way, of course, to direct as much flak away from those characters. And as I say, Rotigus there will actually be most likely supporting the centre. But if he could actually mug something on the way to getting that, because at the end of the day, you know, if my opponent captures the other one, then, you know, I'm getting twice as many victory points as my opponent. But if I can stop them getting to it, then in that case I'm getting loads more, and it means going into the 5th turn it might be unwinnable for my opponent. So that would be the aim there. But the priority will always be capturing 2. And again, hoping to get the first turn. You know, this is where, with a relatively small number of units, you've got a decent chance. I know that there are smaller numbers. In fact, with Nurgle, I've seen Nurgle lists that, for example, have 3 Great Unclean Ones and just 3 units of Plague Bearers, and that's it. And you can see how that would be strong, because that's, you know, but I wouldn't like to play that. They're a bit boring. So anyway, those are what I'm thinking of in terms of the different armies and their relative strengths and weaknesses. And what my task now is, over the next week, I need to decide on balance. There's a few things I need to consider, because I've said I've got to decide by the end of this month a few things. I had sort of said I need to decide which list I'm going to take by the end of this month. In actual fact, that's not quite true. If I am going to take Legions of Asgore, then I do need to decide on that by the end of this month, which is a week's time. And the reason for that is because it's going to be very expensive. I'm going to have to get it from Forge World. That means resin. That means and the time needed to get it all together. And I haven't played any games with it or anything like that. I'm going to have to get motoring on getting that army built. Whereas if I go on the other end of the scale, if I go with Nurgle, well, I've played a few games with Nurgle. I've already got Plague Bearers, Putrid Black Kings, Chaos Warriors, Glottkin, Great Unclean One. The only new models I need more Plague Bearers. I'll need stuff to summon, because that's another thing to bear in mind with Nurgle, of course. Picking up the contagion points, stuff to summon. So, you know, so I need some more stuff for that. But effectively, in terms of what's on this screen here, all I actually need is Rotigus and a Chimera. You know, unless I tweak the plan at all. But I quite like this idea. Then, you know, that's relatively straightforward. So I can get that up to speed relatively quickly. Whereas Legion of Nagash is a halfway house, because although I technically don't have any of it assembled and I haven't played with any yet, a lot of it doesn't take that much. You know, skeletons, spray and dry brush, I can do those pretty easily. They're not going to take a lot. Some of the other stuff, again, it's not got as much in it as the Legions of Asgore. It's not going to be as difficult or time consuming to assemble or paint. So I could still, at the end of next week, just decide, or the end of this week coming, just decide, okay, not Legions of Asgore, but one of the other 2, and that's still okay. I could still give myself a few more weeks to maybe even, and I could maybe even just do both. I could do Legions of Nagash, and I could get the other bits I need for Nurgle and just do both, and then sort of think to myself, right, play a few games with them and decide later on, you know, maybe by the end of March. Though during April I will want to be playing lots of games with them. The last thing I want to do, and I've said this before, is forget silly little Raws. I think that's a real source of nightmarish problems. It's bad enough when you forget a little rule that could have saved you and you lose a friendly game in a tournament. That's much more costly. So getting enough practice with it and trying to bully people in the gaming club to get themselves 2,000 points together so I can actually have some 2,000 point games. But anyway, though that's what I'm thinking of at the moment, that's what's going to occupy my thoughts over the next week. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, and comments down below, especially if you've got any thoughts on how these different armies would be strong or weak on those particular scenarios. And until next time, I'll see you later.